What's going on, everybody? All right, I think we're live. I think we're live across YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, which I haven't done that before. Today, I wanted to talk about the vegetative phase of growth a little bit, and I wanted to talk about the logistics of veg. I really wanted to go over long versus short veg times and what that looks like from a resource management perspective. And before I do that, I've got a little bit of Chem Dog here. I wonder if I can clean up this camera right there. There we go. We got this Chem Dog right here, which Hamilton, who's right there, before he even got it up to his nose, he pulled it back and said, "Damn." Because it's fucking stanky. That stanky goodness. So, yeah, let's talk about the veg phase right after this. Hope everybody's having a great Tuesday. Your bowls are full of chronic. All right. So let's get started. So, if you guys know me, you know that I like to do, doing beds, and I like to do more plants and I like to start off with a really short veg time. I'm never usually maxing out over 10 days, and my typical veg time is usually between 3 and 5 days. And there's a reason why I like to do this. And it all boils down to the logistics of cultivating that biomass. So when we are in a veg phase, we're obviously using a lot more light than we do in flowering because we have an additional 6 to 8 hours typically. So that adds up to a cost expenditure for energy use. If you're doing a longer veg time, 3, 4, maybe even 5 weeks indoors, you're using up space, you're using up that water for however much water you need, all of your inputs, some nutrients, everything for integrated pest management. And all of those things, when you look at it from a logistical standpoint, they all add up. They all add up to the money needed to spend. And so if you are extending veg times, the cost of cultivating increases. Another thing to think about when it comes to logistics is the longer the amount of time that they are in veg, that increases the whole duration of that cycle. And that time that they're in veg, they are potentially exposed or could be potentially exposed, may be potentially exposed to pests and pathogens. So the longer veg time you have, the longer potential time that they could be exposed. And when you're talking about things like integrated pest management, can oftentimes be a large cost associated with the actual products. And so if you're using those products for 4 or 5 weeks, again, that's a cost expenditure. Another thing that we look at is typically, now this is kind of before under canopy lighting. Now we have under canopy lighting, so this may not apply in those types of conditions, but typically what would happen is you would veg out a big plant, you'd fill that into a space to try to maximize yield. However, what you're doing is you're removing about the bottom 66% of the plant. You're cleaning it all up, you're pruning, you're really just promoting those top bud sites. And so when you think about it from a logistics standpoint, where you're spending 4 or 5 weeks to veg something out just to remove 66% of the biomass that was produced, it doesn't make sense um, from a cost perspective. So for me, I personally like to take smaller plants and put more of them in a smaller space to fill in that canopy. That eliminates a lot of the logistical challenges or the costs associated with the veg cycle. So if I'm running 4 or 5 weeks of veg and it's costing me X amount of nutrients, X amount of water, X amount of IPM, X amount of time, X amount of energy, those things can all be calculated. What does that cost me? If you're just taking something like clones and you're filling in a space type of sea of green style, and where you're only maybe putting 3 to 5 days of veg before you flip, and then you're not removing that biomass because you're essentially just growing tops in that space, it can cut the costs associated with all of the logistics behind that. So it's one of the topics and one of the ways that I like to think about in the cultivation space, because you can still get large quantities. It's really about maximizing that space efficiently, being able to fill in that canopy. You could do it with fewer plants, with more veg time and more training, or you could do it with less training and more plants. So when we're talking about the cultivation just from this perspective, I find it much more efficient to do it like that. I do have some more questions in your drying curing process. If I'm around 72 to 74, what is the target humidity I am trying to hit so I do not dry out too fast? Is there a formula that keeps that temp changes a bit? So typically I'm running between 45 and 50% RH in between 70 and 74 degrees. It usually only takes about 7 to 8 days for it to get to the point where I can buck all of the untrimmed flower off of the stalks and stems and tote it into a tote that is not airtight. And that is to redistribute, because what you'll feel is it'll feel like the outside is crispy. Like it's a lot more drier. But once you get into there, you can feel that internal moisture. And that second sweating process is the key to getting it done quickly and redistributing the remainder of the moisture. Because over the course of that 7 days, the plants had enough water. It has enough water to complete those enzymatic activities and the breakdown of a lot of those chemical compounds like chlorophyll. It's the second part of the process that draws moisture from deep within the flower to the outer parts, right? So yeah, this is a good point. If you veg too long, you have a better chance to have problems with your plants. If you're starting off with really healthy clones and they just go right into nice balanced media, there should never really be any type of hiccups. And a good example of this is right now, after I harvested on Saturday, I replanted. It's Tuesday now. I'll probably flip them on Wednesday, so they'll get 5 days. But I did less plants because they were actually bigger when I put them in. So, it's the style that I like to implement is always kind of the best way to fill in the canopy the in the fastest way possible. That's my kind of mode of thinking. feel like this Kimdi is stronger than my last batch.
It's fucking strong.
Kimder.
Yeah, it got me earlier.
Smaller plants also dry faster and usually have less wood to dry out. That's also true. And one of the things too is when you're doing less plants in a space, you're not like when you're growing big plants, you're doing a lot of defoliation, you're doing a lot of bottom pruning. But when I'm doing sea of green style, I'm not, only thing I'm removing is maybe the very, very bottom parts. You're right. Not so it's less labor. And so when you think about scaling all of these systems, especially like I get it, like if you're a home grower and some of this may not even, it doesn't really matter, like it may not matter to you. But when you're running a business and you're trying to decrease your overhead to maximize your profitability, these things have to be taken into consideration. And so if you're like, and let's take for example, you're about to do a new build out and you're like, okay, we need to figure out how we're going to cultivate, because if you're going to be running a veg room and you're running plants that are going to be in there for several weeks, you might have to add additional space for all of the plants as they grow to facilitate the size of how much biomass will be in that room that's going to get transferred to your flower rooms. If you're doing sea of green, you might be able to take that into calculation and be like, oh look, all we need is this small space because the plants are never going to be in here for longer than 5 days or 7 days. So you could decrease that space. You could decrease your overhead. It means it doesn't need to be lighted as much. The room doesn't need to be as big. So that's less materials. That's less money on your infrastructure for cooling and your, humidifiers or dehumidifiers. So even at the build out section, when we're thinking about how you're going to first start to cultivate and the logistics behind that, you can start saving money. And then again, it's like when you move into that veg and you're decreasing the costs associated with that, when you start scaling that up, right, and you're running hundreds and hundreds of lights, the costs, even if it's a small percentage, let's say it's only 3 or 5%, that can make a lot of money. That could be a lot of money, because what if that 3 or 5% is worth $1 million? What if you're doing several $1,000,000, 10 or $15 million in sales, but you need to, that 3 to 5% really makes a difference. Does a shorter veg help with terp profile and bud structure any? Not typically. I mean, like I said, if you're going into a media that is optimal, a good example is when I soil test my beds and I make sure everything's balanced in there. There's enough of everything. When I put clones or when I put plants that I were in solo cups, for a couple of days vegging, those things just start to go right when I flip. For the first 2 weeks, those things are growing. And so, I'm able to fill in that canopy space the same as what I would if we were taking like a square footage of how far down we're producing good quality buds to the top. Okay, so maybe we're looking at 1.5 foot, let's say 18 inches. Okay, by the square footage, let's say you're doing a 4x4 and 18 inches. If you've got that much canopy growth in the first 2 weeks of flowering, then why not just start with plants that are small, because you're going to end up at that point anyway without having that extra biomass that you've had to put resources into. So that's really my point. How many are you transplanting into a 3x3 bed to fill the canopy with that veg time? So this is a good question. So it really is cultivar specific, because some things are apical dominant while some things are auxiliary dominant. Things that like to grow single colas without a lot of side branching, you can add more of those. And I've done in a 3x3 bed anywhere between 9 to 20 plants. And when I did 20 plants, it was clones. They were about 4 or 5 inches tall when I put them in, and I flipped them like right away, like almost right away. I think I like maybe had them in my beds for 3 days in veg before I flipped them. And it was a little bit overkill, but it was literally nothing but just tops because I pruned everything on the bottoms, which wasn't much because there were so many plants. Typically for me, the sweet spot is about 9 plants because in 2 weeks they'll all branch out. And then this is my, my personal grow, and the same way that I cultivate when the new facility opens up. Same thing, sea of green style, small veg time, fast turnover on those rooms. That way I can get, 5 harvests a year. But it really depends on cultivar and how they grow, because the morphology of the plant will kind of determine how the spacing. And then, the thing is too, that's one of the reasons why when I pheno hunt, I don't top. And the reasons why I don't top, because I want to see what the natural morphology looks like. And then I can also grow those when I top them, to see, do they still try, because I have plants that I've topped before, but they still want to express that apical dominance and still have really poor side branching. In cases, in a scenario like that, that would be a perfect plant to just run it right from clone and flip with a lot more plants in an area, because all of its energy is basically focused at apical growth, versus something like I have stuff that I don't even really need to top that just grows really nice, vigorous side branching. So if I was going to use something that already did, like, had natural auxiliary growth patterns, I would put fewer of those in a certain, area. But you really need to know. Can you grab the dog? But you really have to know your you have to know your cultivar. You have to know how it reacts to the different types of training techniques, because if you implement those, and it's different too. If you're taking clones and you're untopping them and you're just trying to promote apical growth versus doing less plants, maybe pinching them, letting them grow out, the morphology will change. So understanding the the plant's morphological expressions, untopped and topped, and the way that you manipulate it is going to have a huge influence on how many plants you put into a certain space. And that's not just for sea of green, but that's for anything, especially if you're doing longer veg times. You're going to need to know if that thing is going to like fill out or if it's just going to want to grow up. Strongman says he uses a canitrol. I've never used a canitrol. I've always just done the conventional method that I've been doing for a long time. Around 70 to 74 degrees, 50, 45, 50 RH, 7 to 8 days hang, buck into totes for a couple of days, trim and jar. Welcome, Rusty Nails. Let's see. I run 9 plants in my 5x5 foot, 8 foot tall. 3, 6, 9, 3 rows of 3. Yeah, that sounds accurate. I'm sure you're putting a couple of weeks of veg on those. I'm sure you're not just flipping from clone in that space. in that type of situation, let's say I was doing a 5x5, I had 9 plants, I would probably veg, depending on the variety. If it was like something like GMO cherry pie or something that gets crazy like blueberry train mac, I would probably do like maybe a week to 10 days. And then if it was something that was a little bit slower to grow, I might be doing something like, you know, 2 weeks to 20 days. Guesstimations. Again, it really depends on plant health and vigor, because I know there's some plants that it's like you flip them from clone, they're gonna be huge by the time they're done. I know like the GMO cherry pie, regular GMOs like that. Um, Man, there's a bunch of them out there that, I mean, they really grow a lot during that transition phase when when you flip the light cycles. Home grow should be a lot easier than commercial. No stress to produce consistent anything. That is true. That is true, man. It is a lot less stressful because in commercial production, it's like you're running a business and you have overhead and employees and payroll and taxes and inventory to manage, all your input costs, electricity, your lease space. And with a home grow, it's like all of that kind of is already being taken care of as long as you produce enough to get you through, to the next harvest. Sometimes I fall a little bit short. I was a couple weeks short on this last one. I ran out of weed, but my homies took care of me. When people like you talk about shaping a plant and the morphology and what's right and what's wrong, I've heard very similar thoughts from numerous others who are experienced and profitable. Yeah. Mac 1 Starfighter number 26 clone. Any ideas when it will be available? Probably not for a while. I've got all the moms just sitting in 1 gallons. I really need to transplant them. I was kind of hoping I was gonna be able to move them. But no, I don't really have any cuts available. We just did a drop with the GMO cherry pie. Those are gone, and they were limited, and I didn't release a lot of them anyway. However, you know what's really cool is the Mac 1 Starfighter is one of the varieties that I sent off to Kevin McKernan at Medicinal Genomics to get sequenced, because I don't know if it is leaf septoria. It might be a different pathogen. They ran it through an initial test and didn't come back with any hits. So they're going to do a whole genetic sequencing to see what the pathogen is. But whatever this leaf spot pathogen that we're dealing with, I don't believe, and I haven't thought that it was cannabis leaf spot septoria, because that is specific to cannabis. And this I was seeing on grass, I was seeing on oak, I was seeing on a bunch of different tree varieties. And you'll see it, I've been using the trichoderma and the bacillus, my microbes and stuff, to really keep it at negligible levels. So there's still pressure simply because it's everywhere around me. However, my plants are thriving. However, there was that one plant, which was that Starfighter crossed to Mac. It's not Mac 1 Starfighter. It's not Starfighter Miracle Alien Cookie. It's not the Mac 1. The Miracle Alien Cookie was the male. And that particular plant showed 100% resistance to whatever this pathogen was. And so when I sent in my leaf sampling, I sent in leaf samples from infected varieties that showed symptomology, even if it was just small. I took samples from the grass that I found it on. I took samples from the oaks, and I sent samples from the uninfected number 26. And so they're doing whole genome sequencing on both the plants and to figure out if it has a resistance and to see what that pathogen potentially is. If it's something novel that hasn't been discovered before, I get to name it. I get to name that pathogen. So that's gonna be coming up. I'm just waiting. It could take a couple of weeks. Last time I spoke to Kevin via email, and I can't wait to share the results with you guys. But I did cross that Starfighter cross to Mac with a male Starfighter cross to Mac to make F2s. So it's full of seed right now. I'll harvest those. I'll run through some of them, and then I'll drop them. So maybe like, I don't know, 4 months, maybe 5 months. Here's a question from Badger. It says, any tips on popping older seed stock? I saw Kevin Jodry probably mention a bacterial soak he likes to use. Do you know what he was referring to? Yeah, so you could use, there's a bunch of different like tricks that I have seen in different science literature. So there's a couple of them is soaking with an amino acid solution. Those amino acids will help stimulate growth. It's easily absorbable into the plant and can help with some expediting some metabolic processes. Also, gibberellin, which is a phytohormone, can help stimulate activity. However, it might cause elongation in the plant if you use that. There's also tissue culture. So what you can do is if you gently remove the outer hard coating and you take the embryo, you can lightly sterilize that embryo, and then you can put it in tissue culture media, like a starting media, and you can germinate it that way. You can always just try the old, the old tried and true paper towel method, where you can do maybe like surface sterilization with a little hydrogen peroxide, shake that up a little bit, and then put it into you take a paper towel, you get it completely wet, you completely wring out that paper towel, you put the seeds in that paper towel in a sealed Ziploc bag somewhere dark and warm. Those are all methods that you can try out. The microbials, you can add things like the bacillus and trichoderma. Those have been shown to work. They create endophytic relationships with the roots and actually help increase the root zone through root symbiosis. There's a bunch of different types of microbes that you could potentially use. You could use things like that Microbe Plus, which is multifunctional soil probiotic. You could use homemade lactic acid bacteria. You could use, purple non-sulfur bacteria, which is photosynthetic bacteria. They'll all have different benefits on seed starts. But if it's just the problem is old, if they don't have enough energy, if they don't have enough stored amino acids to get those processes going, there might be nothing you could do, 2 weeks of veg. Strongman said I veg 2 weeks after, so I was pretty right on the guesstimation of what you would be doing in a 5x5. Jay, let's see. Jay crossed your black light to his IBL NL5. It came out nice. They are short, stocky, and put off big, dense buds. Nice, dude. That black light, for anybody who doesn't know what that is, it's part of the Limarilla line work that I've done. So I crossed the Limarilla to Mac V2 to make the Limelight. And then I took that F2 male from that Limelight and crossed it. No. I didn't. I took F2 female from that Limelight and used my number 28 black lime reserve male to make the black light. So the genetics are black lime reserve, Gorilla Glue 4, Mac V2, black lime reserve, and then cross to his NL5, I guess. Pretty cool. Peace of Mind Farming says he doesn't clone anything. That's really interesting. Back in the day, most people didn't do seeds. There's very few. There were some Dutch seed companies, and there's people like DJ Short that you would hear. I mean, there was seed companies, but it wasn't like it is today. And most people grew out consistently from the same moms or from the same clone stock for years. And, if you got something like an OG Kush, back in the early 2000s, you know, there was no reason to grow out seeds or try to get anything else because you would be getting top dollar for that genetic. And, it was not as accessible. You had to be part of like the crew, or you had to, put down some, big money. I remember trying to get cuts from people was like trying to fucking pull teeth, dude. It's like nobody was letting off fucking anything, especially if it was something that like started to gain popularity, you know, like hog's breath, dude. That was really, really hard to fucking get a hold of hog's breath. And it still is, dude. Their family's been holding on to that fucking cut forever. Things like the real sour D cut were really hard to fucking get a hold of. I remember fucking we tried forever to get the Purple Fantasy before we fucking got it. And that was in 2015. That wasn't even early 2000s. It was like for a really long time, people would hoard genetics and be like, this isn't fucking leaving the fucking crew. And it would be like, like the Afghani bull rider, for instance, there was like a crew of people that held on to that. And that's why it became popular, because there was, less than 10 growers. We all knew each other, worked together, that were growing it. So it's really interesting. The dynamic has definitely changed when it comes to seeds versus clones. And personally, like, for me, I grew the same clone stock forever. Purple Kush, Afghani bull rider, sour OG. Intermittently, I'd throw in some blueberry train wreck, or we'd run something else, like just one run. I remember when we first started, we ran a bunch of stuff, just trying it out, comparing it to what we had. We tried out like Sensi Star and just a fucking bunch of stuff. Romulan was another one that I really, really loved. Your Starfighter V2 F2 smells funky. Ooh, the Starfighter time, the Starfighter times gas V2 F2, I think is what you mean. What does it smell like? What terp profile? Drop the comment. I'd love to know. I'd love to know what you got on yours. The Brandon variant. That would be funny. Could Brix level be an indicator of PM susceptibility? So if you're using a Brix meter, hold on. I think I may actually have one of these things. Give me 1 second. It's a good question. So I thought I had one sitting around here somewhere. I know I do. It's not where I left it. The little handheld refractometers, if you're trying to gauge your Brix using that, it's not a good indication. Those are for sugar content in alcohol. And so when you are crushing up the plant material, what you're getting is a lot of vacuole fluid. You're getting a lot of cytoplasm. You're getting a lot of water and chemical compounds that the plants are producing. So it's not a gauge of the sugar content of your plant. So no, it is not a good indication. I don't think I don't, it's kind of bro science using a refractometer, because it's not an actual proper gauge. The only way that you can get an actual proper gauge of Brix is by doing sap analysis, and that takes expensive lab equipment. Those refractometers are meant for like fruits, things that have a whole lot of water content. If you take something like a cranberry, for instance, or you take something like a watermelon, for instance. They're very fluid and liquid. It's not meant to, it's like when you're taking that, you're not taking the skin and the rind of those things and trying to see what the sugar content is. You're just taking the watery insides. So, if you're having a problem with powdery mildew, which it really isn't that big of a problem unless one, you have the genetic is just has no, you know, defense against it. Unless the genetics are bad, proper VPD will usually solve that, and proper airflow. Also, over fertilization of nitrogen can cause your plants to be more susceptible to pests and pathogens. So don't over fertilize. I love using peroxide to soak my seeds. Comment right here. Yeah, peroxide is a really good way. It's a Brandon Rusty Leaf Spot latent virus. I don't know, man. I don't know if it's a virus. We don't know what it is yet, but that is a mouthful. Here's a good question. What could cause brown pistils, hairs? So the stigma early in flower. Yeah, so too high of temperature. So if you reach your dew point, you need to be thinking about your VPD. But if you reach dew point and you're creating water condensation in your environment, that can cause them to do it. If you've sprayed something like enzymes or some type of IPM product, that could do it. Over fertilization can do it. Too much light can do it. It's usually because of improper environmental, but also some of the things that can do it is if your plants herm and you don't catch it, once those things are pollinated, they dry up to start making seeds. So there's a bunch of different things that could cause your stigmas to prematurely dry up before the plant is sexually mature. How many packs of that limited edition run are there any left? I think you're talking about the Black D Chem Dog Cross the Black Lime Reserve. um, yeah, there's like 14 packs, 15 packs, I think, left. Todd McCormick does have some cool old school stuff. He is definitely an OG that has plenty of access to some original, authentic genetics, like his company is called. I actually have some of that stuff. It'll be in the Battle of the Breeders. All this licensing stuff for the Dispo and Grow is taking much longer than we anticipated. I've grown the GG4 cut inside. It can herm, but usually if you bottom prune it well enough, the only time I've ever seen it is when it's not herm, is when it's not getting enough light. And so the only parts that would do that would be some of the lower. So if you prune it up good enough, you should be okay on that GG4 outside. I've done a lot of work with GG4, man. I've started growing it back in 2013. Just listen. I'm just going through some of these comments, trying to see if there's any questions that I miss. Oh, no, he's Sean separated from Stizzy. He started Craft Cartel. He started taking over really large facilities out in LA. They're out there crushing, dude. Their whole team is incredible. They're like one of the few people that I've seen that can scale up solutions and still come out with a super high quality product. Rusty, I bought a refractometer based on watching the DGC. We eventually learned what sources to trust. Yeah, man. Here's the thing, dude. I promoted the refractometers probably 6, 7 years ago, and then I started learn, and but you learn, dude. You just never stop learning, and then I finally figured it out. Oh, hey, this is what this is. This is what we're looking at, and it makes a lot more sense. You can use H2O2. I wouldn't actually use. I would just use like micronized sulfur and a surfactant, do a little dunk. But I already did that before and after. So before they got plugged, I dipped them, and then afterwards I dipped them. Always do that double dip. Make sure you guys go to the Bokashi Earthworks website. We're having some deals on bundle packs. Microbes are on sale. We'll be back in stock with the Trichoderma and Bacillus subtilis in like a week. Mendo Dope Boys did that episode, and we got a lot of people hit us up, and they burned through our inventory. So what are my thoughts on drawing with the Canatrol? I've never done it, so I can't speak on it. Leafhopper spread curly top virus. Yeah, insects can be vectors for a lot of different pathogens. Yeah, here, I'll put a link in there. KashiEarthworks.net. That's the I wonder if we can actually make a link. But yeah, it's BillKashiEarthworks.net. All the stuff's on there. I think I'm ready to take another hit of this Chemdol, Chemd. I got a little bit of Blue Dream too, but shit, when you got Chemd, why smoke Blue Dream? That's my thoughts anyway. Actually, why don't we just blend them a little bit here? I'll show you this some Blue Dream. I don't know. Just not my favorite. It doesn't to me, Blue Dream never just had like really great bag appeal. I was never really a fan of the terp profile. It's just me though. I know a lot of other people love it. I'm not saying I won't smoke it though. I have 5 blueberry train mac crinkle cut clones in a 4x4. Let's see. Those you popped from seed. They're going to be vigorous, dude. The blueberry train mac, it's huge. You wanted that? They get huge. Anyway, that was a show on the logistics of, for all of you that missed it, I will post this back up. What can I expect with the Starfighter across the BLR when it comes to morphology and effect? If it's leans on the Starfighter side, it's going to finish much faster, and it'll be a lot more short and stocky. If it leans on the BLR side, you'll get like huge buds. They might take a little bit longer to finish. They might be like 9.5 weeks. while the Starfighter ones will be shorter, stockier. They'll finish faster. Oftentimes the profile is going to be like earthy lime peel, and then you'll get some really funky ones on there where you're getting uh some like armpit funk, kind of like not like like GMO, but not like GMO. It's like it's hard to describe. It's just like this weird, it's like kind of a weird funky smell. Um the the smoke though is really strange because a lot of the times it has a flavor that reminds me of like a lavender dryer sheet. Bubbles F4 blueberry. I don't know, man. Like when Blueberry was originally released by DJ Short back in 1998, he released it as an F5. So he had already done 5 generations, and it's just confusing to be like F4 Blueberry, you know. It's just confusing at that point. But I love Blueberry Trainwreck is one of my favorite uh varieties of all time. Romulan was another favorite of mine, and my Limarilla. Those are like my things. They're all, the where do I purchase red wigglers? I actually do not use red wigglers, but you can purchase them at Uncle Jim's Worm Farm. I think you can get them online. I think you can even get them through Amazon. Can insect frass be used as an extract to stimulate top feeder roots into SIR? I think you're talking about systemic acquired resistance. And I think that when you add chitin into your media, it has shown to stimulate some of those resistance genes. It also will stimulate a certain type of microbes that produce chitinase, or that can produce chitinase to break that material down to access the resource from that material. And those specific microbes can also can also produce some beneficial compounds for the plant. Insect frass is good for that kind of thing. Like it's good as like kind of like a prebiotic, you could say, but as like an amendment to try to bring any type of nutritional sufficiency in, it's got really low NPK, secondary, and micronutrient values. It doesn't have a lot of nutrition associated with it. However, it is a carbon substrate that does contain chitin, and again, it can be used as kind of like a prebiotic. Yeah. Can I speak on the blueberry train mac crinkle cut flavor and effect? So the mom is the actual crinkle cut, and anything beyond F2 crinkle cut is line work. So if it says F3 crinkle cut or F4 crinkle cut, that is the line. So the F2 is a selection, and it expresses the most identical terpene profile to the original blueberry train wreck that we used to grow, which is this sweet vanilla, almost kind of like milky smooth front end with blueberry and a distinct lemon profile on the back end. So it's sweet, creamy vanilla blueberry up front with this kind of funky lemon zest back end. And so the two flavor combinations pair super, super well together. And the effect, it's really uplifting, it's cerebral, but it's also relaxing. It's not that it's the type of weed that it's good for if you're going to be doing like art, doing things creative, if you're going to play video games, you know, it's if you're going to go out into the woods. It's not the type of weed that's just like, oh, I'm going to smoke this and then just kind of like take a nap or whatever. It's not very sedative, but it does, you know, give you the body effect. It's a all around just fucking wonderful. That Crinkle Cut won first place Best Sativa Mississippi Cannabis Cup. I've had other commercial cultivators that have purchased clones. Somebody in Massachusetts, they're running rooms of it commercially, and they say, dude, it hits. They're like, look, it usually doesn't test for them above like 22%, but they said it's one of the best sellers. They love growing it, and the consumers love it. I'm telling you, Blueberry Train Mac Crinkle Cut is the business. Now I have the other lines too, the herbal line, the herbal cut that comes from the herbal cut, and the skunk line that comes from the skunk cut. So those are a little bit different. The Chem D cross is powerful. Are you growing any of that out? The Chem D cross to Blueberry Train Mac, or have you gotten any of the Chem D BLR that just dropped, the Black D? Because those are great.
I do.
Here, Mimi's Worms. There's a suggestion for another place to get worms. Uncle Jim's Worm Farm. Dreams 420 Dream says he's got the Afghani Bull Rider cross to 89 NL, 10 days old, bro. That is some serious, like, I don't do a lot of work with stuff that's super sedative and just will just knock your dick in the dirt, but you're gonna really fucking like that stuff, dude. You're gonna really like it. Thoughts about people who use Neptune's? Hey, oh shoot. Hey, can you plug from the other side of the desk over there so don't die on my live here? Neptune's Harvest. I think I think those guys are going out of business. Let me find out real quick. Is Neptune's Harvest going out of business? But I know there was a lot of bottles. I don't know if it that one or if it was Nectar of the Gods. I think it's Neptune's Harvest. No, it's Nectar of the Gods. It's not Neptune's Harvest. Sorry, I am incorrect. I couldn't remember exactly which one. I think Nectar of the Gods is the one that's going out of business. Is Nectar of the Gods going out of business? I had the two confused. I think I've used Neptune's Harvest. Like, I don't know. I think they had like a kelp or something like that I used long time ago. But I stopped using any ocean inputs. Of all the Blueberry Train Mac line from the original C drop to the current F3, what's your favorite? My favorites are the three that I selected: the Crinkle Cut, the Skunk Cut, and the Herbal Cut. If it gets any better from what I already have, and right now, so all of the stuff, I'm running a bunch of Blueberry Train Mac F3 Crinkle Cuts outdoors. I cloned all those, and they're actually going to get flipped tomorrow indoors as well. So they're going to be flowering indoor and outdoor because I'm doing the selection work right now to figure out which ones I want to make F4s with. And so I'm going back and forth, going for my indoor to see like, oh, look, number 34 indoor, it's doing this, it's fucking kid, it's looking like this. Look at it outdoor. Oh, it's fucking one of the biggest ones outdoor. It's one of the biggest ones indoor, whatever. Those are just things that I'm looking for across the board. The Malawi, Chaga Thunder, that Malawi times BLR, that was actually, I think, freebies that Dummy Grows did. So he had some Malawi in there when we did some BLR work. I haven't personally grown that out, but I did do an OG Malawi dog F2. That was a preservation project from a couple years ago. Still got the ABR and Hazy Kush as well. Nice, dude. Hell yeah. Hope those turn out good for you. Yeah, aloe vera is great. I did a whole live on the benefits of aloe vera. Anyway, it's coming up to the hour. I'm gonna head out of here. Make sure you guys go check out the website. I'll talk to y'all soon.